Stand up.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the beginning of another week, and tonight there is going to be a blue moon. I just wanted to be the first to tell you that if you didn't already know. A blue supermoon will appear tonight, and also the DNC will be kicking off this week. A lot to discuss. My guest today, Aaron Rupar. He is one of the most popular, influential, and well-known accounts on Twitter. He has his own Substack called Public Notice. Big deal. Great guest. You're going to love my conversation with Aaron Rupar, which begins at 28 minutes. But first, it's headlines and clips. That's how we do it here at Stand Up, and we cannot do it without your support. So join us, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Now, do it before the end of the month. Thank you. I have a great week of shows planned for you, all culminating on Thursday night at the DNC. I'll be at QED. That's the name of the establishment that Christian Finnegan and his wife own out in Queens, New York. If you want to join us, there's a link in the show notes. We'll have some very special guests. We'll do a live watch party. Mystery Science Theater 3000. We'll have the Zoom going for our hangout. It should be a really good time and hopefully a very celebratory time as well. And from the convention all week, we'll have the great Abigail Hummel joining us as our correspondent. She's there as a sitting in for her father as a Florida delegate. So Abby's going to be there. Really excited to talk to her. Also, Naira Hawk is going to be joining us from there from time to time. She's one of my favorites, and I haven't talked to her in a long time. She'll be at the convention. I'm sure I'll talk to plenty of other folks. Let me know who you want me to talk to on the show this week or anytime. standupwithpete@gmail.com is my email, and I want you to use it. Thank you to Sam for the email who said, Pete, I listened to you back on SiriusXM and then you disappeared from there. I figured you dropped off the face of the earth, but I just rediscovered your podcast last week and I'm so happy to have your take on the insanity that we're living through once again. And he sent me a video to take a look at. Thank you very much, Sam. I'll get back to you and I'm so happy to have you here. I hope that you've become a subscriber and a part of our amazing community of awesome, smart, passionate, kind, funny, and amazing people. I'm here every weekday and often on Saturdays and Monday through Friday. I've got your news headlines and clips here. That's what I do. So if you're looking for the best daily news recap, audio style, you found it. Congratulations. Standupwithpete.com. Tell your friends to join us over here and be in the know. All right, enough preamble. Let's get to the news right now. Of course, it is the DNC this week, and that's a pretty big deal and going to dominate most likely and hopefully, because it means there isn't some other horrific tragedy or anything else, should dominate the news this week in the U.S. And this is all coming on the heels of a major poll from the New York Times and Siena College, which is usually pretty accurate, and I normally don't mention polls, but we are getting closer, and so they start to matter a little bit more. But Kamala Harris now leading the disgraced former President Donald Trump among likely voters in Arizona and has even edged ahead of him in North Carolina, a state which he won 4 years ago, while narrowing his lead significantly in Georgia and Nevada. So that was a huge deal and big news yesterday when that poll came out. Everybody was talking about it on the Sunday shows. But the DNC in Chicago officially gets underway this week. Party leaders have unveiled their themes, and a bit of a rough schedule of events is out around the convention. The theme, by the way, is For the People, For Our Future. Well, okay, I like it. The roster of speakers, of course, will have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Former President Joe Biden's going to get an amazing send-off. President Barack Obama obviously will speak, and I think Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton have been announced as well. The daily themes of the convention will use the growing energy and coalition behind the Harris-Walz ticket, they say, will help to further introduce both leaders and their agenda to the nation. Floor speeches will get underway, or programming gets underway today at 5:15 and go to 10 Central. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday coverage will get underway at 6 p.m. and conclude approximately at 10 p.m. I may punch in and do a impromptu Zoom to watch it with folks because I'll be watching it and rolling on it anyway. Monday, the theme is For the People, and President Biden will address the convention to kick things off. Tuesday, the theme is A Bold Vision for America's Future. They will focus on Democrats' platform to push America forward. In a press release, party leadership accused the former disgraced president of believing the country's best days are behind it and that he and J.D. Vance will implement Project 2025 agenda to pull the country backward. Wednesday, The theme is a fight for our freedoms. Tim Walz will address the convention. And Thursday, Kamala Harris herself will address the convention the final evening when we'll be hosting the Hangout. She'll be laying out an agenda that is going to obviously paint a second Trump administration and how hellacious that would be, and contrast it with a brighter, more hopeful future in her remarks. Also going to hear from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. Apparently Bill Clinton is supposed to speak as well. I mentioned Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama, and there will be so many more, I'm sure. Who do you want to see speaking at the DNC this week? There will be protests, of course, the pro-Palestinian, as they're called. I'm not sure the best way to refer to them. I'm not going to call them anti-Israel. I'm going to call them pro-Palestinian. That's going to be my language this week. Obviously are organized, and they will be protesting. I'm not sure how close they will get to the actual arena where the convention is, or how much of an impact that they will have, but that will certainly be a story. Hopefully there won't be violence there with them, against them, from them, that will in any way overshadow the convention. At least that's my opinion, and that's it. That's all I've got for you on anticipation of the DNC this week. And looking back on the weekend, Kamala Harris was in North Carolina campaigning, where she laid out this economic agenda focused on bringing down the cost of living, pledging at a North Carolina rally to advance economic security, stability, and dignity for the middle class. I'll have some audio for you on that. Her plan calls for building more housing, subsidizing first-time home buyers, and increased tax credits for parents. She also said she would expand President Biden's policies lowering drug prices, and criticized Donald Trump's proposed trade tariff hikes, calling them, in effect, a national sales tax that would raise prices. Some of these policies that she's laid out have been called gimmicks by some in the media, but we'll see how they shake out and get analyzed throughout the week. In other political news, George Santos, the disgraced former Republican congressman, told prosecutors that he intended to plead guilty and avoid a federal trial. He's in big trouble. It's over for him, so get your cameos while he still is not in jail. If he's going to go to jail, I don't know. But I guess he made a lot of money doing Cameo, which is hilarious. And now let's get to some other news. International. The U.S., Egypt, and Qatar presented Israel and Hamas with a, quote, bridging proposal in an effort to reach a ceasefire deal to end the war in Gaza. Negotiations will continue this week. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is using his 9th diplomatic mission to the Middle East since the start of the war to press for quick conclusion, an elusive ceasefire agreement. He arrived in Israel yesterday. So we'll be following his negotiations that he is leading there. The story, when written about his tenure as Secretary of State, should be pretty interesting. And an Israeli airstrike hit a factory in a town in southern Lebanon yesterday, killing at least 10 civilians, according to Lebanese officials. So the war continues there, as it does in Ukraine, where they're aiming to create a buffer zone in Russia's area called Kursk, according to President Vladimir Zelensky. Ukrainian forces blew up a second Russian bridge, trying to cut off supply lines. They certainly do seem to have the momentum there, and following that closely as always. And those are the news headlines that I've got for you from the weekend. I probably should have more, and I apologize deeply that I only had these 5 minutes or so for you on the headlines. But let's get to those clips I've got, and then my conversation with Aaron Rupar. I always try to bring some sound bites, some clips and chips for you here. Let's get the gross ones out of the way first, including just one clip from the disgraced former president. Trigger alert, I am going to play his voice because he's bombing, and that's fun to hear only when it's him. But specifically, he's bombing because he says that it's great to be here, or would that be okay, North Carolina, to the audience of people in Pennsylvania. He's in Pennsylvania, and he thinks he's in North Carolina. So this one got a lot of attention, and I think it's all you're going to hear from him on this podcast today, and it's worth it.
Speak a little bit longer. You know, how would you like it? A guy's waiting with his family for 3.5, 4 days. They have a tent, and the tent is set up. They have hundreds of them, and they wait. And then I walk in, speak for 15 minutes, and leave. I don't know, somehow. Would that be okay, North Carolina? I don't think so, right? They want me to speak all day.
Nobody wants you to speak all day. We've had enough right there. How about that? Most of us probably. All right. Well, there you go. Hilarious. The guy has no idea where he is, and that should be a huge story. I'm sorry, it's probably not going to be, but it should be. And now here's another really hilarious clip. This is an extremely funny example of Peter Thiel, who is one of these tech billionaires, and he supports J.D. Vance. That's why J.D. Vance is there. He's friends with Don and Eric, and he is a supporter of the president himself. He's a big money donor to Republicans as well. He's a libertarian-style billionaire, and he's on the Joe Rogan show, okay? And Joe Rogan asks him if climate science is real science, which on its face is a dumb question. But, of course, Peter Thiel is so terrified of the right-wing cancel culture that he can't state what is the obvious truth. And here's 20 seconds of stammering to try to answer the question, which should be a very simple one, I think. Here it is.
Feel that climate science is a real science? It is.
Wow.
It's.
Wow.
Well, let me. It's. There's several different things one could say. It's.
Yeah. Wow. That's it. Did you want to hear more? I'm sorry. I'm not playing more. You're going to have to go listen to the Joe Rogan show to hear Peter Thiel's answer to that question there. And now here is Fox News panel on Sunday. They are live from Chicago all week, of course, as well. And the chief political analyst, Brit Hume, said former President Donald Trump could very well win the 2024 election, but predicted it would be close because Trump is disliked by a majority of the electorate. Brit Hume laying out a brutal reason Trump is struggling against Kamala Harris. It's that most Americans don't like him.
How do you feel about how things are going in the country? 65% say they're dissatisfied. So, Britt, knowing that and knowing in this setup, Trump is the challenger, why is he not doing better?
Because he's Trump. I mean, the truth of the matter is...
And the show is over. Britt has dropped the mic.
I mean, you get down to it, the past 8 to 10 years have been about Donald Trump. Everything's been about Donald Trump. I don't think that the Democrats would have let Joe Biden get as far as he did if the party hadn't been confident that the Republicans were going to nominate Donald Trump again, which the Republicans did. The fact that Biden was doing even as well as he did until the very end is testament to the fact that Donald Trump, he has a very hard, solid base of support, but it never gets above about 40 to 45%, maybe a little more at best. So his weakness is the predicate for our politics going back three elections. He was able to surmount Hillary Clinton, a uniquely unpopular opponent, but he couldn't beat Biden. And, you look at the losses in the midterms, or the disappointing results in the midterms, it's all about one thing. It's about that Donald Trump, no matter how enthusiastic his supporters are, nonetheless is not a majority candidate. He might win, but he's not a majority candidate.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. How about it? That's Brit Hume over at Fox News Sunday. And now let's go to Hakeem Jeffries, shall we? He was on CNN with Jay Tapper, and he said Biden and Harris inherited 3 different catastrophes from the president before them. And, this is a pretty good clip. Jay Tapper couldn't hang him up. Hakeem Jeffries nails every word. I love the way this guy talks.
Isn't part of the problem here when it comes to high prices and inflation the fact that you and your colleagues on Capitol Hill, along with both President Trump and President Biden, infused the economy with perhaps too much cash because of the pandemic?
The challenge is that President Biden and Vice President Harris inherited 3 different catastrophes from the prior president at the same time. There was a public health catastrophe connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was an economic catastrophe that resulted from the shutdown of our economy. And of course, there was a democracy catastrophe related to the January 6th violent assault on the Capitol incited by the former president as part of the effort to halt the peaceful transfer of power. And so in the context of the economic catastrophe, the shutdown of the economy had consequences. And when demand came back, the supply chain needed to, of course, catch up. And so that is a process that has been underway that has triggered an inflationary environment. But it's fair to say that part of the challenge that many everyday Americans have felt is that price gouging is occurring by some bad actors. And it's reasonable for us to look into how we can stop it from occurring. Vice President Harris is simply saying we have to make sure that markets are properly functioning. That's the American way.
All right. Hakeem Jeffries, everybody, from State of the Union on CNN. I thought that was real good. And now here is Tammy Duckworth. She's a senator. Of course, she is a combat veteran of the Iraq War, an amputee, a double amputee. She is a Purple Heart winner. She's won a whole lot of medals. Anyway, you heard probably Donald Trump's comments over the weekend about Medal of Honor winners. You know what? The clip includes it. You're going to hear from Trump in this. I'm sorry. You got to hear it, though, because you have to hear Senator Tammy Duckworth's response on This Week with ABC's Martha Raddatz.
I also want to ask you about what former President Trump said Thursday at an event. He was talking about awarding Miriam Adelson, a major donor of his, the Presidential Medal of Freedom while he was in office. Let's listen.
Oops, sorry, you have to hear this.
It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets or they're dead. She gets it. And she's a healthy, beautiful woman. It's right. And they're rated equal.
They're rated equal. As an Iraq War veteran, badly wounded there, recipient of a Purple Heart, what's your reaction to those words?
Well, American voters have a chance to choose. Do they want a 5-time draft dodger who denigrates military men and women and our veterans and calls us suckers and losers? Who doesn't want to have his picture taken with amputee veterans of various conflicts to be the next commander-in-chief? Or are you going to have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who care deeply about veterans? Tim Walz has been out there leading on so many issues for veterans, especially burn pits. Donald Trump is despicable. He doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief. And certainly those remarks are consistent with where he's always been. He thinks that we're suckers and losers. And frankly, he's not fit to be commander-in-chief.
All right, there you go. Angela Duckworth, Senator Duckworth at the DNC in Chicago, nailing it. And now let's go to Kirsten Welker, NBC's Meet the Press. She had Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, on to try to grill her a bit on the economic proposals from Vice President Kamala Harris to put a federal ban on price gouging. Here's a little bit of that.
Delve into some of the policies the vice president laid out, some of her economic policies this week. Among other things, she's proposing a ban on price gouging. Here is what Obama administration economist Jason Furman had to say. He said, quote, "This is not sensible policy. And I think the biggest hope is that it ends up being a lot of rhetoric and not reality. There's no upside here, and there is some downside." He warned effectively that price controls could ultimately stifle economic growth. So do you think that's the best way to bring down prices in Michigan?
Well, I think people are reading too much into what has been put out there. We know that Kamala Harris is going to be focused on building up more affordable housing. We know that Kamala Harris has already delivered on making sure that health care is more accessible and affordable for Americans. And will protect Obamacare. That's 1 million people who have health care in Michigan right now that Donald Trump's been trying to rip away. That only adds costs onto people's backs. And so that's why I think this opportunity economy that Vice President Harris is talking about and laying the broad strokes for, I think shows we really do. She sees every American. She understands what people are struggling with and wants to help you keep more money in your pocket. The biggest part of our personal budgets go toward housing, go toward health care, go toward the fundamentals. And she's got a plan on all those fronts to help more Americans be able to get a path to prosperity.
Well, Governor.
All right, there you go. Gretchen Whitmer defending Vice President Kamala Harris and her proposals, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about this week. And here is Justin Wolfers, University of Michigan economics professor. He was on CNN, and he had this to say about Trump's economic policies versus Harris's economic policies. I love this guy. And not just because he has a great Australian accent.
All right. So as an economist, what do you think of the proposals that Harris has in store if she becomes president?
Frederica, if I might, I just want to put them all in a broader context, which is this week we had a big economic speech from Trump, a big economic speech from Harris. Let's put them next to each other. The first thing to note is that Trump's economic speech was not, in fact, about the economy. It was an 80-minute incoherent rant in which he started talking about immigrants and tampons and San Francisco and everything except the economy. By contrast, Harris's speech was squarely focused on the economy. Second thing, Trump's facts weren't true. Harris's were. Let me give a simple example. Both talked about the cost of living. Trump claimed falsely that the price of bacon is 4 or 5 times higher. It's nothing like that. Harris claimed seriously that bread was 50% more expensive. It is. And I think that matters because serious problems deserve serious analysis, serious facts. And the third is that Trump's promised policies were neither promises nor policies. You ask him about inflation, he says, I promised to get inflation down. You say, how? And he said in his speech, I will write an executive order telling my cabinet secretaries to come back to me with every idea they have about how to reduce inflation. That's not a policy, that's a process. By contrast, Harris actually laid out her plan. There are pluses and minuses, and we can all have a look at it and really debate it, but this at least was taking economics seriously.
All right, there you go. Justin Wolfers on CNN. I thought that was real good. And now let's go over to the governor of Minnesota and the future vice president, I hope. It's Tim Walz. He went back to his Nebraska roots over the weekend on Saturday, his first trip to his home state since becoming the vice presidential nominee. Apparently, he talked about his love of Nebraska football, joked about the historical significance of the Stonehenge replica built out of classic cars known as Carhenge that sits near where he taught in Nebraska. And he then emphasized the values he'd learned growing up, helping neighbors and minding everybody's business. But he also made this very funny joke, which went viral at the expense of J.D. Vance, of course.
And this idea about knowing us, let me ask you something on this. Do you think J.D. Vance knows one damn thing about Nebraska? He's going to be here next week. You think he's ever had a runza? You think he's ever had a runza? That guy would call it a hot pocket. You know it. Every one of you in here know it. A damn hot pocket.
He said a damn hot pocket and shook his head. And now here he is at Aliquippa High School football practice, where he was campaigning with Kamala Harris, who's standing behind him while he says this. This is in Pennsylvania over the weekend.
I know it'd be easy, especially now. Our politics has been pretty ugly. Our politics has seemed pretty negative. Our politics is something that I know what I fear most is that young people turn away from it rather than turning into it. Politics isn't that much different than this. It's about something bigger than themselves. It's about setting a future goal and trying to reach it. It's about doing it with dignity and hard work. It's about doing it with humility. And when you lose, you walk across the field and you shake hands with the other team and know they played hard too. But we're all in it together to try and make it better. And things like investing in this public school and having, I can't imagine what this place looks like when it's filled with folks and the lights are on and the leaves are turning and that game's in the fourth quarter and somebody has to make that play. Somebody has to step up and you look to each side of you and you know, I trust them. I trust them to make that play. Our country's not that different. Our neighbors want to be with you. Our neighbors want to do what's right. And the more we figure out that we're in this thing together and we have more in common than we have separated, we're going to do a heck of a lot better. So I have to tell you, thanks for taking some time. Thanks for giving us the privilege to stand on this field because you earn the right to be on this field. You earn it with a lot of sweat. You earn it with a lot of time in the weight room. You earn it with the folks who came before you and know that they care how you conduct yourselves on this. And we feel the same way. We have a responsibility to the American public to conduct ourselves with dignity, conduct ourselves with a vision, and to conduct ourselves on all of this. When football's done right, it is just fun as heck to play the game. And that's the way things can be. So I have to tell you, I am just honored to be with this leader. I'm honored with someone who's showing us that. I'm honored with someone who's out doing politics with a smile on her face and with a sense that everybody matters. And we're here in this space to say it's not just a cliche. Our future is with you, and we have a responsibility to deliver it to you in good shape, to make sure that we're doing the right things to give you a good shot at the future. And so for me, it's a privilege to be on this team. It's a privilege to see this leader do it with such joy.
And it's a privilege to share that clip with you. That is Tim Walz in Pennsylvania over the week. He should have promised that he would be at one of those football games in the fourth quarter watching if he's elected. That would have been fun and probably never have happened. And that's why I'm not running the campaign. All right. Finally, I've got another great rant from the hilarious Trey Crowder, comedian Trey Crowder. This is about 3 minutes and then you'll love it. Of course, as always, we'll get to my conversation with Aaron Rupar. Here it is.
So for the past few weeks, Harrison walls have been building momentum and burning up the trail, and Trump has responded to this in the fashion of a bitter, unemployed divorcee. He mostly just sits at home all day, bitching incoherently on the internet. People are confused. Why is he not campaigning more? Is it because he's tired? He's gun shy? What? Some people said, hey, maybe he's not worried about campaigning because he knows he plans to steal the whole thing anyway. Speculation, which is, of course, based on nothing more than the fact that last time around he very publicly tried to steal the whole thing anyway. Yeah, we should talk about it. Look, as a party, they've been headed down that road for a long time now. They know their policies are not popular. You know, that most Americans would prefer not to be indentured to a handful of microdosing megalomaniacs, all right? The official GOP platform is about 2 brainstorming sessions away from including billionaires get the right of prima nocta, and they wonder why they can't connect with people. All they have is fear-mongering culture war stuff, and turns out telling everybody that Democrats are going to take their jobs and guns and give them all to a bunch of purple-headed transgender atheists only gets you so far. All right, when Americans vote, they lose. They know that. That's why they've been manipulating the system for so long. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, it's still not enough. They're still not viable, so the only option they have now is to reject the system entirely. They've put plans and people in place to ensure that this fall Trump wins, even if he loses. You know, your loser cousin that drives a motorized Trump billboard and has a dog he trained to be racist named Barron? Yeah, well, you wouldn't let his ass run a dishwasher, right? But he is straight up management material in MAGA world, y'all. They got him in charge of elections all over the place, and that's all it takes is a handful of that guys gumming up the works by refusing to certify votes they think are gay, and next thing you know, the president is determined by a Supreme Court that already said Trump should be a king. It's not ideal. All right. One of the big ironies of the whole thing is, you know, the MAGA base will justify it all by saying they were just trying to stop us from cheating. They'll believe that. They were for months, for years now, the heat-seeking pander cannon they call the news has just been telling them, like, California's taking violent migrants and paying them in heroin to commit voter fraud for Kamala. And your sweet Aunt Tammy's sitting on the couch like, that is just classic California. They believe anything. These people live in bubbles of bullshit. They go from the Baptist church to the rural truck stop diner, talking exclusively to marginally different carbon copies of themselves, and then saying, like, everybody I know hates Kamala, and they're acting like she could win an election fairly. They must think we're stupid. Yeah, we're in the end game of fake news now, y'all. Objective reality has never been more irrelevant. These people will go with anything, all right? But not all is lost. All right, last time around, Trump couldn't pull off the Ocean's 11 of dumb treason when he himself was still in the White House. Biden and the Democrats are not going to just roll over and let this happen. I mean, I know historically that would be very on brand for them, but still, they seem different lately, right? I have to believe that the Sunday school fascists are not the only ones with a plan here, all right? And as for the rest of us, we just need to get out there and try to run the score up so far that even these sons of bitches ain't dumb enough to deny it. All right, that's the plan. Love y'all.
Yeah, that is the plan. We got to run the score way up. We got to win everywhere, win big everywhere, which is why I'm going out on tour. I'll be in Pennsylvania and Arizona, Nevada, and Michigan. At least that's the plan. I'm trying to make it happen. I still even want to go to Chicago for the first couple of days of the DNC. I probably should have done that, but the girls have just come back from Italy, and I had to get Ava to college, and I don't even know if I should spend the money, but that's the reason I'm not there. I will be talking, of course, to Abby Hummel, Naira Hawk, and many more folks that are there hosting the watch party on Thursday night with all of you. And I can't do it and wouldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. I think you're going to love my conversation with Aaron Rupar. I hope you'll let him know if maybe he'll see the mentions. He's got more followers than almost anybody on Twitter, but he often does. So go over there and learn more about him. Follow him and support him. His Substack is Public Notice. It's really good. He has a whole bunch of contributors that are constantly writing there. Publicnotice.co. Go subscribe to that. Aaron was at Vox for 3 years. He was at the Center for American Progress's Think Progress before that, and he's a very well-liked, respected guy who I was happy to finally sit down and talk to. So let's do it right now with Minnesota's own Aaron Rupar.
Yes, I finally got him. Long time, first time. I was a fan at Think Progress, followed you to Vox, followed you to your own thing, Public Notice. Aaron, I'm so psyched to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you as well.
How would you describe like your beat and the arc of your career? Obviously, always in political media, you've been honest about where you stand on the political spectrum and so on. But you're a journalist, and you cover what?
Mainly, I cover the right wing. I cut my teeth covering Trump and the Trump White House back in the day when that was the thing. And I was actually marveling today looking at my newsletter that we've pivoted pretty seamlessly into a lot of coverage of the Kamala Harris campaign. Today's newsletter was about Tim Walz and his remarkably courageous stand for LGBT youth, talking about the gay-straight alliance that he helped lead when he was a school teacher in rural Minnesota, which in the late 90s was a really big deal because the mainstream Democratic Party was not as sympathetic as he was to LGBT people. I cover American politics very broadly, but myself personally, my background going back to Think Progress and then at Vox was covering Trump and the Trump administration. So I still feel like that's my beat, even if the newsletter itself is much broader than that these days.
So what's the language that you use to describe the change that you've seen, the evolution on the right? Because I've been covering political media for about as long as you have, and I have my way of talking about it, but I'm more interested in yours. How do you see the evolution of Republican politics in America, given your career covering it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because when I started at Think Progress, which was my first job in D.C., I'd been working as a journalist for, at that point, about half dozen years. So when I took the job at Think Progress, that was in early 2016. And my first day there actually was Super Tuesday in 2016, which was a very memorable day in that it was a milestone on the way toward Trump basically totally taking over the party. He won most of the states on Super Tuesday. And then after that, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that unless something really weird happened at the convention, he was going to be the nominee, which it's hard to remember back at that time how strange that was and how jarring it was, because heading into that primary, everybody thought it might have been Jeb Bush or, right, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, any of these other kind of more mainstream choices. And when I think back when I started covering Trump, it was this novelty still in the sense that the Republican Party kind of seemed like a separate entity, like Trump was taking it over, but he hadn't totally taken it over yet. Then we can think back on the 2016 RNC when Ted Cruz got booed off the stage because he wouldn't endorse Trump. And then you contrast that with the RNC that just happened like a month ago and how that was really like almost a North Korean style celebration of the leader. And so that really, I think, encapsulates how it's changed. I went from being a very dysfunctional party. I don't want to glorify what the Republican Party was because I didn't think that they stood for great things pre-Trump, but it went from being more of a traditional conservative party to more of a cult of personality. And that's been the arc of Trumpism as this national phenomenon. And they're in an interesting spot now as we barrel towards early November in the election this year, where it seems like now Trump is on the smart money. The smart money has it on him losing this November instead of winning at this point. And if that happens, what becomes the Republican Party at that point? Is it possible that he would be the nominee again in 2028, even after losing twice in a row? Maybe. So yeah, I think the party's become much more debased. I even think part of my beat is covering right-wing media, specifically Fox News, Newsmax, Steve Bannon's podcast, all those sorts of things. And back in 2016, there was still a lot of uncertainty about Trump. I remember, and probably you do too, that Trump was feuding with Megyn Kelly, who was a Fox News host at the time. And there was some hostility from Fox News toward Trump, and that's pretty much gone now.
She didn't take it personally, or she forgot about it because she's on the train, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that again illustrates the dynamic that's been at play. But yeah, that's been fascinating to me. I never really thought that one of our parties would become a cult of personality. I think that you grow up in this country and we have a certain conception of how our politics works. And it's been surreal to see that happen and interesting and disturbing in another way. But yeah, really from 2017 onward, I think a lot of the dynamics have been pretty consistent to lead us to the point that we're at now. When I think back when I got my start covering this stuff in 2016, it was a very different landscape and the Republican Party was a lot less culty than it's become now.
I have always felt, maybe you feel similarly or slightly different or completely different, that right-wing media is the tail that wags the dog of the Republican Party, that Republican policy is often made based on what Mark Levin or Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh or the like would say or do. And I've always felt like that's not the same with Democrats and progressive media. They don't have a lot of powerful people in progressive media that are influencing policy and voting that much. We can certainly pick and choose. But I wonder how if you agree with that or if you slightly disagree either way, I wonder what you think is the most influential because you cover all these different media outlets, certainly Fox News and Newsmax. But you mentioned Steve Bannon and he's in jail. I want to know what you think. I think that's really significant right now that he's not out there doing what he does very effectively, which is turn into a bat and fly away, that vampire. Did you know I shared a studio with him every day for a year?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I've got plenty of stories. But how do you see...
What year was that?
That was the year, it must have been 2016, because I just showed up to work one day and he wasn't there. I go, where's Bannon? And somebody go, oh, he's running Trump's campaign now, like overnight. So it's just an insane situation story, I could tell you. But what do you think about the right-wing media being so influential, and what does it mean that Bannon's off the scene for probably the most important time?
Yeah, I think you're right that it's significant that he's not there just because he is such a prominent voice on the right, and the people that he's had filling in, the bits and pieces of it that I've seen, are not anywhere near as charismatic as he is, and his show doesn't really have the kind of resonance and the audience that it had, although he will be out in just a few months. I think straight after the election that he's getting out. So it's not like this is a long-term thing, but you're right. I think in that, especially on the left, it's a very different type of media. I think a lot of people want to set up the equivalency between MSNBC and Fox News, but I think it's fair to say that MSNBC is anti-Trump. Obviously, Morning Joe is super critical of Trump, and Chris Hayes and Maddow. But they don't really, you asked about policy, and you don't really see a lot of policy coming from those shows. It's more like when Trump was going through his trial earlier this year, it was like wall-to-wall coverage of the Trump trial or wall-to-wall coverage of Trump's impeachment. But it's that style of coverage rather than like substantive policy coverage, and it's left to more niche outlets or journalists, oftentimes operating on the internet instead of on TV. And so it just feels like the media ecosystem on the left is more fragmented in that way, whereas you really still have kind of Fox News, especially setting the agenda for Republicans, where I think that's been one of the things I've lucked into over the years is that when you watch a lot of Fox, you end up understanding the Republican Party because it's like a pipeline that kind of goes both ways, where you have these Republicans who go on there for interviews with influential hosts, and the hosts will ask them leading questions that reflect talking points that are in vogue that then those Republicans will use, right, whether they're on the House floor during speeches or back in their congressional districts, that sort of thing. And so there is a sense in which I think Fox News especially sets the agenda for the American right. And I don't really think there's anything equivalent to that in the left.
Yeah. To just drill down into that, at least with Trump, he's literally on the phone with Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, and he gives jobs to people that were on Fox News yesterday. I work with Bannon at SiriusXM. Next day, he's working for Trump. Larry Kudlow's on Fox News. Now he's working for Trump. And so they literally worked for the president, and if they weren't working for him, he's on the phone with them all the time. You don't have progressive media. The most influential hosts rarely, if ever, are talking to Democratic leaders. I'm sure they do to some extent, and more than they ever used to. But at the same time, I just feel like that's the reason, the fact that they're working in government one day and in media the next day. Does it happen? Sure. Jen Psaki did it, but it's just, I feel like there's a real false equivalency there. I don't know if we need to belabor that more, but if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think you're right. I know Biden's a big fan of Morning Joe, and there was a little bit of sense when all the Biden drama was taking place last month surrounding was he going to get out of the race or not, where there were a couple episodes where it felt like the hosts were directly appealing to him in one form or another, and that gave me some flashbacks to Trump, because that was something that would happen a lot with Trump, where Lindsey Graham would go on Hannity's show and say, Mr. President, this or that. And it was like breaking down the wall there and directly appealing to someone through the TV set. But yeah, that is the unique thing on the right. And I think it's healthy that we on the left don't function in that way, because it's not a great way to conduct business when you're working in government.
You watch Trump, you watch his rallies, you document them for us. And I hate to ask this question, it seems so unoriginal after 10 years, but you would know as well as anybody, if not at best, what's happening to the guy. How would you chart his change, if you will? I don't want to load the question much. I would say specifically since Kamala Harris. I mean, I had a hilarious JL Cauvin, comedian and commentator, on, and he basically compared Trump. He's like, he's glitching. He can't face the fact that he's up against a black woman and he's losing and their crowds are bigger. He's glitching. But how do you talk about the low energy? Is he afraid to go out because of the assassination attempt? Does he feel like he's losing? Because what seems to be happening over the past couple weeks is what I'm meaning. Is anything happening? Is anything different?
I tend to think that this conversation about Trump changing is a little bit overstated, just in that I feel like he's mostly the same guy. Now, got it. If you go back to 2015-16 and watch clips from his rallies back then, there was a certain kind of energy to them that is no longer there. And I don't want to say he was like lighthearted. That's not the right way to put it, because he was talking about a Muslim ban and he was encouraging fans to beat up demonstrators at his rallies. So I don't want to kind of misrepresent things, but there was a certain almost like sense of humor infused into his rallies, and it was laughing at people, not with them. And it was still pretty corrosive, but I think he seems a little more worn down now. I think he legitimately had fun, I believe, campaigning in 2015, 2016. And then as soon as he won, which I don't think he really expected to do in 2016, I don't think he really enjoyed being president that much. I think he enjoyed the power and kind of the attention and the sense that every tweet he posted, people were hanging on his every word because for good reason, because you can shape policy and create policy when you're the president just by your public statements in that way. But I don't think he really enjoyed doing the work to the extent that he actually did any of it. And then I think when you combine that with the legal troubles, the conviction, the fact that now he's really facing prison time possibly if he loses, like there's a lot on the line for him that goes beyond elected office or no elected office. It's a question of freedom for him. And I think specifically in terms of this, what you're talking about the last couple of weeks, this has been the conventional wisdom, but I think it's true that I think Trump believed that he was facing Biden, and I think he was very confident that he would win that. And I think that it was probably a 55-45 type situation when Biden got out. I was never one of the doomers in the sense that, oh my God, Joe Biden's done. He's got to get out because he's going to lose for sure. I never really believed that. But certainly Harris has reinvigorate the Democratic Party and is bringing an energy to the table that Biden couldn't and an enthusiasm that Biden wasn't able to generate. And so I do think when you watch his unhinged press conference yesterday at Bedminster, where he had the boxes of cereal behind him and like ketchup bottles, and the idea was that he was really going to stay on message and talk about inflation and how food prices have risen. But instead, right away, he's doing the same old ranting and raving and stream of consciousness. He's talking for an hour before he actually takes a question. I think we're seeing a guy that's unmoored right now who, is incapable of changing, who can't stay on message and is losing. And so I think he's flailing. He's trying to define Kamala as this like crypto communist, government controlling the means of production, Marxist person, which I don't really think resonates because I don't think people buy it. But that's really the only play in his playbook at this point is smearing and misrepresenting who she is and what she stands for. And it's not working. And so I expect if that continues to be the case, which I expect that it will be over the next 2.5 months, that it's just going to get zanier and more unhinged from here. And so it's like watching a train wreck where I'm riveted by it, but I'm also worried about what it means for the people involved and for the bystanders and everyone else, because I don't think it's going to get more hinged from here. I think he's just going to get further unhinged. And for a lot of the reasons I just touched upon, his freedom's at stake. It's a big deal. And we all know that he cares first and foremost about himself. And if he loses, he might go to prison. The stakes are very high.
You have one of the most influential accounts on social media, specifically on Twitter, other platforms as well, and all of political media. I wonder about you. I think about you a lot, Aaron. Think about your life, your work-life balance, your kids. I wonder, we all have a certain responsibility with our platforms, and I wonder, being as influential as you are covering the issues that you cover, how much do you have to worry about what you're putting out there? Now that you're independent, you used to be obviously at Vox, and before that, Center for American Progress. You had bosses and editors. You get public notice, and you have all these great contributors. But what are your journalistic ethics in terms, how do you see your role and responsibility being so impactful? You're not like a lot of the rest of us. Any one of your tweets goes very big, all of them, and the things that you cover, and it's such a big account. How do you see it, your role?
I don't think that my standpoint on ethics has really changed from when I was at Vox or Think Progress. I've always tried to do my best to represent things fairly, obviously with my own viewpoint and values embodied in that. But you're right that if anything, it's been liberating to go independent, because when I was at Vox, I remember a few times, and this was for any number of writers there, where you would post something on social media that was maybe a little too incendiary or too spicy, and you'd have get called into a meeting and just be reminded to tone it down, that you represent the company, those sorts of things. And I still try to carry that. I'm not trying to make myself the main character. I think we all understand how that can be a bad thing when people are talking about you rather than the things that you're covering. And that can be difficult in a context like we're in right now, where emotions are running high and there's a lot on the line over the next few months. And it really bummed me out with the Biden stuff in June and July, where I was perceived, I think, fairly as a defender of Biden, because I think he's done a very good job as president. I also was very open that I thought he was going to have a hard time winning given kind of the media environment and the way that as soon as Nancy Pelosi was working against him, I knew it was pretty much over for him just because of how effective she is. And that there was about a 2-week period there where he was withering on the vine as she was working to try to get him out of the race. But it turned into one of these things where it became a circular firing squad where liberals were attacking each other and I was being attacked because I was defending Biden by people who wanted him out of the race. But it seems like we turned the page from there. And it's been refreshing to focus on the true threat and see the left kind of come together in a way that just a month ago. And I think that's been reflected in what we see in the polls where Kamala Harris has momentum. She's winning now. Trump is losing. And we see him lashing out in the way that he's decomposing as he realizes that he faces an uphill battle to win suddenly. But yeah, in terms of, I don't think my ethics have really changed. I do think that it has been liberating to go independent because I can be less self-conscious, but I'm still the same guy. And I feel just grateful overall to have the account and the voice that I have because it was a lot of kind of coincidences and a lot of luck involved to get to the place that I've gotten to.
There's a criticism of your work and others who do some similar work. I don't agree with the criticism, but I want to take it on for the sake of conversation that by watching the Trump speeches and rallies or even right-wing media and then sharing it with your huge account, you're platforming those voices. You know, every day I do a news segment on my show at the beginning of my show every day, and I want to include clips of Trump, and sometimes I do, but I have to give my audience to tell me trigger alert, man. People hate his voice. They get so affected by it. I think you have to hear what he's saying, or at least reporting about what he's saying. But what do you make of the criticism that you and others take these clips and you put them up? Maybe it's out of context. I don't think that really matters. But this idea that you're platforming Trump with your Twitter account, Aaron, what do you say to those people like, don't do that?
Yeah, I think it was a lot easier question to deal with when Trump was president because inherently when you're president, what you says matters because that can translate. I mean, we touched upon this earlier, that it can translate into policy that affects, tens of millions of people. Yeah. I do grant that it's in a more gray zone when he's not president. Now we're staring down the barrel of him possibly being president again and push back in the sense that I think when you look at the thread I did yesterday on his news conference, for instance, if you read the quote tweets and read the replies, this is not persuading anybody to support him, I don't think. So it's a matter of putting it in the proper context when he's lying, to say that he's lying and to explain why he's lying, how he's lying. But I've always tried to do that. And I think that's one area where I've always been cognizant that I can add value as a journalist is not just doing stenography or quoting him, but taking a step back. And if he's lying, calling him out. And if there's a specific motive behind the lie, to explain what it is, or if there's a way to quickly fact check it, to do that as well, but also to focus on what matters and not get distracted by the sideshow of him slipping over a word or something like that, to make sure that if you're attacking him, that it's a clean hit and it's something meaningful and not frivolous. But I think that you can overdo it. If I was reacting to every single Truth Social post that he puts out there, it'd be overkill. He's slandering people all day. He's attacking people. So you have to pick your battles, so to speak. But I guess I would just say that I think we've seen more and more that the more Trump is out there and people are paying attention to him, the worse for him it is. And I think he actually benefited in a weird way between 2021 and last year from being in the wilderness. He had his Truth Social account, so he was speaking to his base there. And he would do his rallies like every month or 2 months, and he'd get his base together and do the usual shtick for them. And then flew below the radar. And I think in the meantime, because we had COVID and then we had inflation, there became almost this weird nostalgia for the Trump presidency in a certain way where it was like 2019, things were pretty good. And then we had COVID, but who could have really helped that? And it became almost this like soft focus view on the Trump years where people forgot how unhinged it was and threatening nuclear war with North Korea one weekend and then firing James Comey the next because his campaign was being investigated. And we were lucky to get through that as relatively unscathed as we did, with the exception, obviously, of COVID and the million Americans who died there. And granted, had Biden been president in 2020, COVID would have been bad no matter who the president was. So I don't want to make it sound like Trump was exclusively responsible for all of the COVID deaths, but certainly he made it much worse than it would have been. But anyway, so you go ahead.
Yeah, there's just no way to measure the anxiety you had around the fact that there was a pandemic and that the person in charge was him. Like, you just felt better if there was an adult in charge. You didn't know what was going to happen, but you can't chart that, and journalists can't really write about that level of anxiety. But every day we were living not only with the pandemic, a virus that we'd never experienced in our life, but there was nobody at the top in charge. It was a crazy person in charge.
And the other thing that's related to this that I do think is like important to mention in this context is I think Biden gets very little credit for the fact that between January 2021 and roughly like May, we got to a point where if you wanted to go get vaccinated, you could go to the local pharmacy, get vaccinated. And granted, then we had the Delta wave after that. And then people got mad because they thought that once they got vaccinated, that was going to be the end of it. And that just wasn't how this novel coronavirus is going to work. But I think that for obvious reasons, that was a tough time for pretty much everybody. And so we've memory hold it. But when you kind of factor in the state of the country when Biden took over, the presidency compared to where it was even 6 months later, that was a remarkable turnaround. And there's no guarantee that had Trump remained president, that the vaccine rollout would have worked that way. We could have gotten to a place where that following summer actually felt normal, which was very jarring at the time because we had a year plus of basically being quarantined at home amid mass death. So anyway, just to get back to your original point, I think that the more that people have been paying attention to Trump as the presidential campaign has heated up and people have locked in a little bit more with what's going on, the worse off that he is. And every time I do one of these threads, the response is, oh my God, this guy is completely unhinged. I can't believe anybody's voting for him. So I just don't think it really carries water, this idea that, if someone like myself is tweeting about him, that's like boosting him. Now, I will say on the other side, CNN yesterday carried his news conference live. They eventually cut away because he rambled for about an hour before he got to a question. So I think, the ratings were, they're probably like, this is not very good TV. Let's get out of here. But that is dangerous because he's lying constantly. And if you're just handing your airwaves over to him to let him lie, and you're not fact checking him in the moment, for people who are more low information viewers who might just be channel surfing and tune in to 5 minutes of that, I don't know how you would really process that. It's hard for me to put myself in that place, but I do know that he lies constantly and that if you're just broadcasting him, you're letting him lie to your viewers who may not be sophisticated enough to know that. Yeah. So that is dangerous. But I think if you can put him in context and fact check, to me, it's doing him more harm than good for people to be paying that sort of attention to him.
Final two quick questions. How has Twitter changed in the past year or so? There's a pretty big controversy about a little over a year ago. You got kicked off for a day. There was a huge campaign to bring you back. Where are we at? How much has it changed for your account? How much has it changed overall? Because I feel like in many ways it's back, but obviously Elon Musk is still in charge and heavily influential. Have there been major changes?
I think you're right when you say that. It does. I don't know, back is quite the right way of putting it, but it feels more relevant now. It felt like it was waning, and now it feels like it's become retrenched as like the main platform. Now, I will say, like, my main blind spot, and I've done so many podcast interviews where I've said this, but I need to get on TikTok just as a lurker because I feel like that's becoming more integral to just kind of like societal conversations about the news, and especially how young people are consuming news. And I'm not on there, although I see a lot of reposted content elsewhere. We went through that phase with Elon after he took over in late 2022, where there was this weird cycle. And I'm sure you probably, with the size of your account too, you noticed this, where there was a cycle where Elon would post or say something outrageous, and then you'd have en masse people deactivating or deleting their accounts. My followers would go up and down and up and down and up and down. And it was in sync with whatever Elon was saying or doing that was alienating people. And so I branched out. I'm on Threads, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Substack Notes, I'm on Mastodon. So I try to have toeholds as many places as I can, just because I know there are a lot of people who are no longer on Twitter, who I once followed, who now maybe are on Blue Sky, they're on Threads. And so I want to make sure that I'm still posting and sharing my work with them to the extent possible. But that kind of speaks to, I think, one of the issues where Twitter still Twitter is still the easiest for someone like me who does video stuff to do that, because Blue Sky doesn't have video. Threads does have video, but it's a much different audience. You don't have the right wingers on Threads, and that's a big part of what I cover. So I want to be tapped into what people on the right are saying, which you can really only get on Twitter. So yeah, I think you're right that if I had to pick one platform to post on, it would be Twitter, for better or worse. And I felt like there was a brief window about a year ago where Threads was really gaining. They made a very intentional choice to suppress political content, push it out of the algorithms. Unless you're really seeking it out, you're not going to find it. And it feels like Twitter is a more appropriate place to talk about politics, even though I feel gross even saying that, just given the ownership situation. And I think a lot of people probably tuned in. Was that still this week? This has been a long week where Elon interviewed Trump for 2 hours, which kind of speaks to the state of things at Twitter. Yeah. But I also, if Elon had been pulling antics like that 2 years ago, I think it would have been much more effective for him. But I think he's so thoroughly beclowned himself that people just shrug it off. It's okay, Elon's endorsing Trump. Who cares? 2 years ago, he had an aura to him where it was like, man, this like brilliant, cool guy. Oh, he's endorsing Trump? Wow. But now it's like, who cares? So I don't get the sense that's really moving the needle for Trump at all at this point.
Final question is, you've had more traditional jobs in media, and now you're doing this independent thing, and you're also open about your personal life, your family, your love of all things Minnesota sports. How is your work-life balance? I mean that sincerely, because I had an amazing work-life balance when my kids were growing up. When I was in corporate media, my show was live every day, 3 to 6 at Sirius XM or whatever different time slots it was in. And I knew what was what, and I had a salary. Like, guy like you, guy like me now, you're out here, you're doing everything you can. You're so busy and in so much. How do you have little kids?
I got an hour to talk about that? No, it's been fine. I think back when I really my account really took off, like during COVID, because I was tweeting all of the Trump press conferences. Like, all I had at that time to do was clip, because my wife was pregnant. We didn't have kids yet. We were quarantined at home. Now that's a lot more difficult. Even this week with the Elon thing the other night that extended until like midnight Eastern time. And then there's a Trump rally the next night. Like, the evening hours are the ones that are tough because my kids are home. Of course, I want to spend time with my kids, play with them. They get annoyed if I'm upstairs working or whatever. But I do really appreciate the freedom that I have. There are trade-offs with any choice that you make in life, but I would never take back going independent, because being my own boss, being able to call my shots, if I want to go to a baseball game on a Wednesday afternoon in the summertime, great. I don't have to file for PTO. I just have to ask myself if that's a responsible choice to make and things like that. No, it's good. I think that we're very active parents. My kids are 2 and 4, but we spend a lot of quality time together, and I know they're having a great upbringing. It leads to some sleepless nights for me, and some probably a little bit too much bourbon at times, because that's just the way I unwind at the end of the day, at the end of a long day. But overall, I can't complain. I feel really blessed to do what I do and to have an audience and platform like I have. And overall, I'm grateful not only for the family that I have, but to be able to do what I do for a living.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm a big fan, have been for a long time. I'd love to watch your work change and develop. And
yeah, Pete, absolutely. It's nice family chatting with you, and let's do it again, maybe before the election.
Anytime, man. Thank you very much. All right, there you go. Aaron Rupar. Go subscribe to publicnotice.co right now. Let him know that you heard him here on Stand Up, and hopefully he will come back. That's all I've got for you on today's show. Hope you like the news and clips, and I put a lot of work into the show every day, and I am so, so grateful for your support. Let me know how I can make a difference with this daily podcast or in your life in any way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. You guys are the very best. I've got no other things to say here at the end on a Monday other than I hope you have a good one. I appreciate you for listening, especially you bumblebees who listen all the way to the end. John Carroll does all the music for the show. He's a Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, and we absolutely love him. He sings us out right now.
Creaky knees, you gotta stand up, stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up, that's right. You got to rise up, you got to stand up. Stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his and see them flee the scene of that experiment. If you stand up, alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be told up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand